I was really standing in for most of the students of color at the school. I think there were probably 80% of our students of color were there. It was supposed to be a 1-hour meeting on a Friday. I relayed this all to you last year, but at our last meeting of the year, but it was supposed to be a 1-hour meeting. It ended up being a 3-hour meeting when there were a number of things that were requested, from having a dean for diversity. So with Jennifer's departure now, of course, the person that we're searching for will be a dean for student affairs and diversity. So we will in part respond to that. But there were some other suggestions. One of the suggestions was to have cultural competency training. Since then, and so I want the BALSA representatives to know this, I've looked at the literature there, and most of the literature on mandatory trainings that comes out now suggests that they're counterproductive when they're mandatory because you don't convince the people who are already convinced. And so I'd suggest that even if we do that, I would be very hesitant to make it mandatory, and then I don't know if it is worth it. And to conclude, what I'd like to suggest we think about, I did meet yesterday, Renee Farrell was there. We met with Faye Jones, who's the interim vice president for diversity. That's now a position that reports not to the provost, but to the president. The position previously held in Maureen Taylor Archer, but now it's only for diversity. So we met with Dr. Faye Jones and talked about things that are being done at the university. So for example, the university offers what they call a culturally effective care symposium. It's mandatory for first-year students in the following programs: medicine, nursing, public health, social work, dental, and they also include pharmacy students from Sullivan. It's a credit-bearing course that is required for students depending on what the unit decides is appropriate. They do it early in November and then in the spring. She felt that if law was interested, we could plug into that, since it's talking about how you work with clients in the community. There is also an initiative at the university level, a health and social justice scholar program. Each unit in the following: medicine, nursing, public health, and dental selects 1 to 2 students per school. It's a 3-year commitment. They get small stipends. And once again, even though health is in the title, they look at, among other things right now, they're looking at some Title IX questions, medical mistrust, and again, there are legal issues. And so they felt this would be a way that we could plug in. And I haven't discussed this with Enid and Sam, but for example, there might be an obvious connection there with HRAC, for example. I don't mean these to be exclusive, but I offer them as suggestions of things we might do. The thing that I think we have to address, though, is that the students of color have communicated very strongly that they don't find it a particularly welcoming environment. And that should concern all of us. As I said last time, if you're on the train as I am, believes that that's morally and socially the right thing to do, great. But even if you don't buy that, economically the market is demanding this. So it's part of what we need to do as a school, is to have a robust population of diverse students for the reasons I've just said. So there are some ideas of things we could do, but I also want us to have discussion about how you all think that we should begin to talk about this and address it. So Sam, Enid.
Well, the first thing that occurs to me is I love this idea of plugging into what other units are doing in terms of training our students and preparing our students to deal with a diverse base of people who will be utilizing their services. In the medical community, obviously, it's their patients. For us, for our students, it would be clients. I worry, though, that if we do that and nothing else, or little else, that it will be seen or perceived, maybe accurately, by the students as, well, we're putting it all on them to do something that would advance the cause of addressing the issues of diversity, and we're not doing anything ourselves as a faculty. we're not sort of contributing to how we can improve the culture by our own efforts. And so I think there has to be, I love that step, but I don't think it can be the exclusive step.
Enid?
I agree completely with what Sam just said. That's exactly what I was going to say. We need to address the culture, and that's something that we in the building who are here beyond 3 years that students are here have to do something about, and we can't put it all on students. The other additional support would be great, and HREP and students are invited to the same events that the health and social inclusion scholars are invited to. They're supported by the consortium, so we try to provide that support generally, but much more needs to be done. And I think
So other thoughts, Les?
I don't know whether other faculty were at the meeting with you, but can you give us 5 or 10 examples of what the students were observing last April when they said that we weren't supported?
So I'm not sure I could give 4 or 5 examples on the spot, but for example, there were student comments about faculty who had, I remember one particular example about a faculty member who, and I say this to students alleged, I wasn't there, so I'm not saying I doubt it, I wasn't there. Alleging that the faculty member laughed at jokes about excluding people at the border, or they perceived faculty members as supporting positions that favored separating families and in a way that made them feel singled out. That students generally, I remember a couple of African American students saying that they had gone to faculty members and found them unwelcoming or supportive, that faculty members, and they cited particular examples, faculty members saying you shouldn't be here, you are not going to succeed in this career. Renee, is anything, I hate to put you on the spot, you were there too, do you remember any other particular examples?
I would rely on some of the students that may have been in that, to be.
Yeah, I don't want to put them on the spot though.
Well, but I just need
Okay.
comments.
Yes, so I think you hit it. You hit a lot of them. There's also that if something did happen, whether it was a incident between a minority student and another student, or a faculty member, there was just no way or no one to talk to about it, nowhere to get kind of some closure on it, or feel like it would be resolved, and that it was gonna be kind of pushed aside. And so people's feelings were hurt, and they felt bad and didn't feel good here, and so that was the thing. And I wanted to address a point that Professor Abrams made too, is that a lot of students of color tried to transfer last year, or did transfer, were successful, and then tried to. So this is a huge thing. I mean, admissions is working extremely hard, and so we should change the culture.
Tim, anyone else?
So I think Dimitri raises something that I was going to suggest, some sort of internal process, right? So I was going to ask you, have you, I mean, obviously we need to preserve anonymity, we need to preserve confidentiality. Have you spoken to the faculty members that were involved? Because, I mean, I, for one, would hate for something that I said in class to have been the source of such reaction by the students and not know it. And I would want that brought to me, and we could, talk about, next steps. So I was just wondering, have you done that? And, can we collectively figure out some way to do that, in a way that respects both parties, respects viewpoints, but I mean, I for one would want to know if that sort of thing happened in any of my classes.
I'll answer the question in 2 parts. So with respect to, for example, those 2 examples I gave you, the comments where the student felt isolated and singled out about keeping immigrants out at the border, and the second one where a student went to a faculty member and said that the faculty member had said, "You don't belong here." I asked the students if I could say something, and in both cases, they said they preferred not to because they felt they would be retaliated against. So I'm prepared to do that, and I would have, but I didn't, because the students asked. So Ariana, Kurt, and Robin.
Okay, so of course I think an internal process is a good idea, but I think that we as a faculty need to take steps to put forth very visibly that we are committed to grappling with these problems. And many other places have mandatory types of training, and what I would propose is that you give professors an option. So in this way, they're not required to do something that they don't want to. Off of the top of my head, 3 potential options, and I'm sure if we looked at the literature, which I am not an expert in, there are more. But one thing would be to have cultural competence training for our faculty. That could be one option. Another option could be for people who don't want to attend that, just ask them then to have lunch with X number of diverse students so that they can get to know them on a one-on-one basis. The amount can be set per semester to equal the hours that other people are in training, or double the hours because it would take longer that way. Another thing that a lot of businesses do is something called like trust building training, and what this would require would be for people with different political persuasions, ethnicities, viewpoints, diverse people on the faculty to work together for a half day or day-long training that would build trust amongst us and get us working together better. So I'm sure there are other options, but I do not think it is fair for us to be like, well, we're gonna designate one person, or we're gonna send some students to a training. I believe what we need to do is something for ourselves, that it needs to be mandatory and that it can have options so that people do not feel uncomfortable with whatever option they choose.
Okay, thank you. Kurt, Robin, and Jamie.
One of the things that about the new, I want to talk a little bit about the new Dean of Students Diversity. It seems to me that, and I realize we're looking at this position already, we have a job, but it looks like the kind of position where if we aren't careful with it, it will become a Dean of Students primarily and less a diversity dean. And what we might want to think about is, at least as it evolves, once it's filled, to make sure that being the place where someone can go and express concerns and some sort of process start there and have the necessary degree of anonymity for the student to begin. That still becomes an important focus of that job, not just a sidelight with all the things that will start gravitating to somebody who has the name Dean of Students. That is a real concern of mine, that we should, not just this moment, but continuing once we fill that position and move on, that is a concern.
Just so you know, one of the suggestions of the BALSA students last year was that we begin to keep a log, and again, it could be anonymous, of incidents, just so that would help people begin to understand the nature of the problem. So that could be one thing we do there. Robin?
That was
And then
going to be
Jamie,
my
then
point.
Cedric.
So the students were very emphatic, several different students, about repeated offenses over the years that they've been here, and that they didn't think there was any repercussion for the faculty member or members, that it just kept happening and there was no record of it. They didn't know what it was, and they would like there to be a log of some sort. So that was my point. They said that over and
Right.
over again with their examples.
Right. Jamie, then Cedric.
A couple quick things. First, the med school program I've taught in it for several years, and one of the coolest things about it is it has an element of choice. So students have to participate all day, but they get to pick the sessions they go to and customize it, and it's really focused on being a doctor. So I don't think we'll be able to to fold into that, but I particularly like how it's focused on professional training. What is it going to take to be a successful medical practitioner? And so I feel like that they have a great model for us to replica. I think we need a process that is standardized, that's not distinct to one professor or one incident that we agree on without any live conversation about any live thing. What would we all as a faculty want to be the proper process, agree on it, and then stick to it, because that will just help build trust. But I do think we all have a lot to learn on this, particularly those of us using the Socratic method. The Socratic method, there's abundant literature about how marginalizing it is. We could all just start to audit who's participating voluntarily, who do we Socratic call, who do we allow to participate voluntarily. There's all sorts of data on the ways in which that can be a marginalizing experience for many students. And then I think that this is also an issue in the job search process for a lot of students, and we should start to think about how we would handle that when their students go into an interview organized by our institution and hosted at our institution, and they're being asked discriminatory and inappropriate questions in interviews. I think we should start to think about if we wanted to get together and start to build some best practices and protocols of folks who come into our building to interview our students. And then finally, we have to read our evaluations. Many faculty, flaunt that they don't read their value or that the evaluations don't matter. Like, there are powerful things in there every single year for all of us to take out. And if that is the most obvious tool for students to privately and safely communicate concerns like that, but if nobody's reading them and there's no consequence to putting it in there, then we're missing a huge opportunity for private feedback to ourselves.
Thank you. Cedric?
I wanted to sort of respond to something that Professor Matschmeyer said. I think you raised an interesting point. But I think during the search process, the people that we're looking at in the pool will be able to do both of those roles. And I think that if you have a associate dean for student affairs and diversity, that would be an integrated role. I also want to underscore that the way that this conversation is going really shows why we need that person in the position. We need someone to be actively engaged with students who raise valid concerns. And so in an open forum like this, for example, when you say, well, can you give me instances or quantify it, that already has a chilling effect. And you saw what happened, maybe the students would say it, or confidentiality. You don't want to embarrass the professor who was engaged in that conduct. And so it becomes awkward. So we need sort of an institutional player who would have the authority and gravitas to move forward. Professor Abrams, I'll just say this about teaching evaluation. They are a two-way street, and some of the comments are absolutely racist, short-sighted and ignorant, and directed at a person of color on the faculty. And that has happened throughout my career. It hasn't happened recently because I'm getting really old. But there was a period of time where I did not read them, and wasn't bragging about that, just for self-protection. You can go crazy. And some have profanity in it, fire them all, how do they get there? And so when your position is questioned, as soon as you get here and you see that out in the public sphere, students are going to embrace that and evaluate you in that way. Presumption of incompetence that women of color and people of color have in the classroom that white colleagues don't have to deal with. And so it's difficult to have these conversations. Also, I think white colleagues may feel like we're pointing the finger at you. I don't think that's the case. Structural inequality exists, and the reason we're talking about this again, and we've been here 25 years, is because we have not effectively dealt with these problems. You get, First Amendment, or I'm tenured, or why am I doing this, you can't make me do this. And then the dean is placed in a difficult position of being sort of like an 8th grade high school counselor, when we all should take the initiative to make this place work. And we can't convert everybody. I'm not last year out you with my great colleague Ariana, but some people were not going to go to lunch, and I take that fine. That's life and whatever. We cannot convert everyone, and people are going to do their own thing, but that cannot be the place that we work at. If they don't want to get on board, fine. We can't convert everybody, but it takes a modern law school to include everyone and make it work. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Less, others? Less?
I mean, I think that when Jamie was going through her list, I think, most of what she said, arguably applies to, all of our students. In other words, we have faculty, I think there are some faculty who are, they treat everybody the same, they're unwelcoming to everybody. And I think that for that reason, an associate dean maybe ought to be as much, maybe there should be a different person to be the associate dean for student morale. But the unfortunate part about it is there are some faculty who really don't want to be bothered to have students come by their office and talk to them. I understand that that as the conversation began, we're talking about a situation that maybe deserves special attention. But you know, I have said to maybe I haven't said it sort of like Cedric said. Maybe as you get older, you just don't want to bother. But yeah, I mean, it's occurred to me that some of the students don't belong here. I'll let a student just sit and do a color by the numbers on her iPad for the whole semester, and I waited until the last day because that way I was sure she wouldn't have any notes for the whole semester. I just went up, took it, and put it on my desk. As much to embarrass her as anything else. But I'm just saying that in some ways, on a larger basis, we have offending faculty who treat everybody badly, and we also may have people that from time to time we wonder how in the world they got in here. Like I said, that's a large problem, and that's not what we're talking about here. But all I'm trying to say is that it's not just, I mean, I guess if I were a student who had encountered that, I guess or if somebody come to me and told me they had encountered an unwelcoming faculty member, I would have asked them to check with other students to see whether that person was unwelcoming to a larger segment of the population.
Okay.
Doesn't make it right, I'm just saying.
The queue is Scott, Melvie, Enid, and Cedric.
Well, I just wanted to, I guess, make the comment, I mean, all this discussion has been about racial diversity, that I'm assuming that sexual preference, sexual orientation is, that problem is not perfectly okay here too, I would think. Just wanted to bring that in. I don't know in this class what they're talking about for the first years, if that even is even addressed in it. So I just don't want to get that lost in the conversation.
I mean, I have heard from some of the last year student leaders in Lambda Law that they suffered some, not very appropriate comments, mostly from other students, so I've never heard them say about faculty, but that's just one person who hears a little bit. But thank you. Melvie?
To Professor Abramson's point, yes, we do talk to each other. I mean, we tend to run in the same circles because there are very few of us. So we do go ahead and talk to each other and address whether this has been an issue with the previous professor. And when we conclude that it has, we then raise the issue of having to talk to the dean and the subsequent deans, which is why we had the meeting. It happens with students, it happens with professors, not all professors, but it does happen, and I think that it has to be addressed. And saying that all professors treat all students the same is grossly inadequate. I mean, I can give you an example with a student, I don't particularly mind, most people know. I had a student last semester ask me in the middle of my first class whether I had received my citizenship through the marriage of my husband, my white husband. That is inappropriate. It should have never been discussed. And I've had issues with professors, and like Professor Powell stated, I don't feel comfortable at this moment to discuss what issues I've had with what professor based on race or discrimination.
Enid, then Cedric?
I think it's easy to get distracted, and I think if we're talking about cultural competency, obviously we would deal with all minoritized populations, right? But we have to start with the issues that consistently are raised here at the Small School, and And everything else is really just a distraction. Let's start, do something consistent, as Jamie suggested, and have a process so that we can build the trust, because the trust is the issue. And consistently for a long time, we have not addressed these issues in our law school. So let's just not get distracted and let's deal with the issue, please.
Cedric?
I don't have anything else to add. I would just say, one thing. You have to sort of look at how the discussion progresses and what we're talking about. I think Enid raised the point of distraction. Always when people raise a concern, the first thing is there must be a neutral explanation for it. Maybe it didn't happen. Quantify it or qualify it. And if you can't do those things, then it's irrelevant. It's happening in this conversation, maybe unintentionally, or maybe we're just lawyers and trying to substantiate things. But those are the rhetorical moves that are happening now. Did it really happen? Or maybe it meant this, or maybe you really didn't think it that way, or maybe you should talk to other students, or can you get the small number of people of color who are students here together to legitimize what you're saying. So there should be no proxy for legitimization. If they are raising adequate concerns, and they are valid concerns, and we can say that being here, experiencing it throughout coming up through the tenure process or whatever. And that's not to say, look at you or whatever, and I know it's uncomfortable, but you just can't dismiss what someone is saying as not, there must be another reason. The reason that they're taking time out is that they're raising valid concern. And so you have to hear it. And so the first move should not be, well, could it be this? I mean, throughout my career, no matter where, it could be here, it could be a major law firm, it could be even public interest institution, when you raise a concern, or maybe it's that. Well, it's not that if I'm telling you how it is. And you can interpret it any way you want to, but the first move should never be, it must be something else.
To build on this comment, Cedric, I would just repeat to everyone, Rob and I forgot you were there, but you were there at the meeting last year, Renee. You both can comment on this as well. To sit in that room with most of our students of color talking about their concerns for 3 hours, right, says something has to be done. So I suppose that's the question. How do we move this forward now? What should we do collectively, Robin?
The thing I was struck by was that I've been in meetings like that over the years because I've worked with diversity, as most of y'all know, for a long time. And they were the same. It could have been 10 years ago, it could have been 5 years ago. It was the same type of things. It was all the things that you would think of. Before I went in that room, I thought, well, I think I know what I'm going to hear. And I just heard a lot more of it, though. I think the students last year, and I do want to say that they were so moving and articulate about everything they were saying. They had really, they had learned their law student lessons very well. They were so prepared and so unflappable. You all should be proud of those students because they were, and it was a huge amount of students. It was, I think it was every minority student in the law school. And it was very impressive, but they had valid concerns, but it was nothing new to me, and that made me really sad. I was very sad to hear it, but not surprised.
So we've had several, are there other suggestions?
So, and I know you want to get to how do we solve it. Again, getting the right person into this new position. And so I know a lot of faculty members have people that they think have applied or that are good people, but just think about what the students want and who this person will be dealing with and what they'll be doing. But I think that's key to what moving forward, how we solve it.
So just on that point, I was going to mention this later, but on the Associate Dean for Student Affairs and Diversity, it's still open, Renee, for how many more days?
It's still open until tomorrow.
Until tomorrow, but the committee has met. We have 4 finalists. 3 of them, did the 4th call you back yet?
3 have scheduled phone interviews,
Right.
first round interviews. 1 we're still waiting to hear from, and we may decide based on the phone interviews to go back to the pool and write more.
And it was a national search, and I think that we extended because initially we weren't satisfied with the people we were seeing in the pool, but we extended the search. We put out some national feelers, and that's actually yielded results. And so we're getting people who have had experience in this area, and in student services more broadly as well. So Renee.
When we do move past phone interviews, we're going to bring folks to campus to meet with various constituencies. I would encourage everyone in this room to try and be at those meetings. I will send out as soon as they're scheduled. But I'd encourage everyone in this room, and I'm going to reach out to student leaders as well to be there and to meet with these folks individually.
That's great.
I think that the things that we discussed are good ideas, but I think that Colin, if there's a person about whom, a faculty member about whom there has been even one description of things like we've heard in here, you need to go and talk to that person. And if you want to take a couple other people with you, fine. But to let that person know, I think that's part of the leadership you need to exercise, and you need to slam that person pretty good. I don't care whether that person thinks that's a grievable thing for you to go talk to them. That's part of what the leadership should be, and it's part of what the rest of us, the attitude that the rest of us ought to take toward that person, regardless of whether each of us individually goes to talk to that person. I don't know which person it is, but I just think that's a place to begin, because in just majority of terms, it starts at the top.
Well, I agree with you, Les, but once again, in the case where I had particular examples, I asked the students if I could go and talk to the faculty member, and they said no because they felt chilled. And I'm not prepared to do it. We have few enough students of color that they felt that they would be identified even if I tried to anonymize it. And I went back to several people a couple of times. So I agree with you. I'm prepared to go and do that, but I'm also not going to jeopardize the students' feelings and fears. So Jamie, then Sam, and then Tim, I think.
So we can't wait till that person's hired. That's too far out, and we can't keep pushing this to one person or another. I propose that as part of your dean's report next meeting, you open it up and go around and everybody commit to doing one thing between now and the next meeting to personally improve and explore what the systemic and cultural issues are. And let's hear some examples. What did people try? What did people learn? Participate if you want, don't participate if you want, but something to get every person who's sitting at this table invested and just start to hear some ideas. I went to lunch with a student and here's what I learned. I looked at my course files, here's what I learned. I was teaching Socratically and here's how I changed it. I had an assignment and I changed my fact pattern to be this. Anything that anybody could do between now and the next meeting that doesn't put us waiting for someone else to handle it would be a good start. And then we could creatively learn from each other.
That's a great suggestion. I'm prepared to do that.
I'm not arguing that the dean that ought to be the only thing that's done. I'm just saying that's something that doesn't require the rest of us to say, to encourage them to do it. I think everything we've talked about in here is a good idea, Jamie, including the thing, what you just said. I'm just saying that we need a leader who will actually go do something. And I understand the blowback in that type of situation. And maybe if it happens sometime that somebody makes a report to you and they're all third years and they all graduate, then after they graduated, you can go talk to that person. But I'm just saying that's one thing to do. And as Melvie said, if because by virtue, and I'm sure there's a long history to it, by virtue of students talking to each other, they decide who the hell they want to put up with, who they want to take for courses, and who they don't. Unfortunately, in the first year, they don't have that choice. But beyond that, they do.
Again, Les, I'm willing to do it, but I'm not going to jeopardize students in the process. Sam and then Tim are next.
I think that there can be techniques that deal with both concerns of anonymity, but also dealing with the problem. Unfortunately, they do involve delay. They involve things like one of the things we did with, for example, honor code issues. Because it, so we did it over time. We said, over the last 3 years, we've had this many complaints of this type. So one thing that you could do, or any dean could do, would be to say, over the last 2 years, I've had these kinds of complaints about this kind of behavior. Some of it will involve students, fellow students, some of it will involve faculty. So that I think there are some techniques that can be used to deal with this. But my major point here is, I think that is an avoidance technique for us to say, this is what the dean should do. And it takes the leadership of the dean. It takes all of us being committed to doing something that is relevant in the way we're teaching, the way we're making ourselves available, the way we communicate the concepts in our class, et cetera, et cetera. So, say the dean has a role, just like the rest of us have a role, but it's not the role that in any way alleviates any of the responsibility that we should have as a shared responsibility.
I'm happy to start to keep the log that we discussed, and when the new associate dean, assistant dean for student affairs and diversity is hired, we can work on keeping that together. I certainly do know these things, but you're right, it does mean that it's not getting dealt with immediately. Tim, I have next. Are there others? So Jamie's given us one suggestion. I'm happy to do that at the next meeting. Are there other things suggestions for how we move forward on this?
Well, I loved Ariana's idea about doing training that is quasi-mandatory, but with options that put everyone to the task of being responsible. Whether you go to the cultural competency training, or you get some insight by actually going out to lunch with students from minority populations. That idea of a menu of options, but that put everyone into the position of contributing, I think that's another idea that should be on the list.
I've just been reading literature recently that suggests that in this context specifically, because I've taken this seriously since last spring's meeting, that mandatory requirements backfire. The literature is pretty clear.
Well, as I say, that's why the creative idea of giving people choices alleviates that mandatory aspect.
But it's still mandatory.
Right.
Well, there was a third suggestion, Ariana. There was the cultural competency, the lunches. What was
The trust building, everybody has those. These
Right.
aren't unusual things.
No, I just didn't remember that.
Students.
I know that. Enid.
And I think whatever process we set up to maintain this log needs to be an anonymous process that students have the option
Yeah.
of putting their names in, that is publicized and known to the student body that this is a vehicle for lodging concerns. Because, some kind of process that is not well known is not really going to serve the purpose of advising the law school community of issues that are arising.
No, that was very clearly their suggestion, and the idea would not only be that it'd be very much like what the Ombuds does, right? So she collects information, reports on patterns to the provost regularly, and it'd be very much like that without identifying any individuals.
Right, we can do that next week.
So, well, I'm prepared to see what kind of cultural competency trainings are available. I'm not excluding that, but are there other things that people would like to do, like to see done? Any other Ariana?
It just may go with a new position, but I think the small things like Jennifer would send out, you can add your pronouns, because all of us are really busy, and if we can get some information in an easy way, we're likely to take that action, but if nobody's requiring us to think about it, we're less likely to think about it. So even if you can't make something mandatory, you can certainly push out small ideas to the faculty in that way.
Are you saying I should, or the?
Or the new whatever, but if you send me something that's like change your pronouns, chances are, or add your pronouns to your email, chances are I'm gonna add my pronouns to my email. If nobody sends me anything, I'm gonna be thinking, oh, there's a lot of stuff about pronouns and maybe I should start using they instead of he and she, but I'm not actually gonna make the effort to do it despite my best intentions. So that if it's made easy to do things that make our environment better and not small way, that is very helpful to helping the faculty do this.
Enid?
And I think I said this at the last meeting, we could have 10 minutes of our faculty meetings every other month dedicated to some form of cultural competency knowledge, right? We all want to know so that we can be better professors. I don't think this is, that's not infringing on anybody's, First Amendment rights in terms of how they teach their class. It's learning. We need to also be in learning mode as well. And, like Cedric, I'm old as well. And so, there are things that I can learn, and I think we all should be open to that.
That's a great idea. I'll follow up with you and see how we might, what kinds of things we might do. Okay. So, once again, and Jamie, you're next, but I will, following up on your suggestion, I think that's a great suggestion for the next meeting. So I'll work with you to send a reminder to people in advance, just to make sure I understand the idea. But you have the floor.
Building on Edith's point, one thing that could be incorporated would be spotlight moments to just hear from our student groups that are affected. Just a quick check-in, how what programming is happening, what kinds of things are our student groups doing. I think that would help us connect as well and avoid getting to a 3-hour meeting if they could speak to the faculty directly. We have if we added BALSA to the rotation once a semester or Lambda once a semester, try it out and see if it's informative if the student leaders will comfortable.
Okay, so Renee, you and I can meet with student leaders and talk about what they might do. Okay, that's great. Okay, Kurt, yes.
Just one last thing, I don't want to give any students any extra things, but we could formally invite BALSA to send a representative to our faculty meeting. Do we have that?
Yeah, I'm the president. Good to meet you, Mr. Kurt. I'm Dimitri Johnson. No.
We don't introduce people, so.
Oh, yeah. So I'm Dimitri Johnson. I'm the president of BALSA this year. Pleasure to meet all y'all. Yeah.
You here? You come regularly?
Yeah, I was here last week, so I'm starting to. I'm new.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Oh yeah. Amazing.
Well, actually, this is a good idea. We can, in future meetings, Jenna, please hold me, keep me honest on this. I'll make sure that students identify themselves. I know you all, so I just assume that people do, and that's not a good assumption. And their association,
Yeah.
right? So Melanie, you're here for what? For what? Are you for SBA or?
I'm filling in for SBA.
Okay. And Will, you're here for SBA, right?
I'm here for everything I'm a part of right now.
Okay.
I'm a part of BALSA, I'm a part of SBA. I'm a student here. So.
And I did want to say just thank y'all for this conversation and so many people chiming in. This is really awesome to see you, so we appreciate it.
Okay, well, so, yes, Robin.
Everyone could support the diversity committee programs too, because we work with all the student groups. We've got, youth on the committee, Women's Law Caucus is represented, LAMB is represented, SBA is represented, so, faculty being at the programs is very important to the students.
That is absolutely true. It really matters, right? Okay, so we have several action items starting with the next meeting, and and I'll follow up with others if you as appropriate. So we're now at 1 o'clock. Let me just say I'm going to ask everyone's indulgence and end the meeting 5 minutes early today if we go that long, because the provost could only meet this week for a half hour at 2. Lars and Renee and I are going over to discuss a new tuition model that we think is in our interest because of the new budget changes, and so we want to be there to meet her at 2. So on that proposal, moving to my dean's report, so we have this proposal which was approved by the Tuition and Budget Committee, which will allow us significantly to reduce our out-of-state tuition. Other schools have had success in the last year. I've been talking to several deans. For example, Kansas did this, and they saw a boost in numbers, and the task is to try and get the boost in numbers and also then to boost your credentials at the same time. So we're proposing something similar. We are going to go over today and discuss it with the provost and see what she has to say, because Renee and her team really need to have definite information to go out and market. It's our view also, when I say our, I mean Renee and mine and the budget office, that this is in our long-term interest as an institution as well, because national demographics, you know, are baby booms, kids are moving through college. The number of people who are becoming college age is declining. Kentucky is particularly low, so if we want to continue to thrive, we need to be getting students not just as we traditionally have, largely from Kentucky, but also to increase our yield from other states. So this is one way to do that, becoming more affordable, because of course, for in-state students, we're pretty affordable. For out-of-state students, we're less affordable. So that's what we're doing. Joanne, Aleda did not come, right? So is she? I don't think so. So I hope many of you have met Aleda Lujan, who's our visitor from Turku. She leaves in a couple of days, if not, but she's been a great but too brief a visitor here. And just to remind you, we have that. John, I promised you 2 minutes during my report to talk.
I was just going to say that Aleda will be at the Brandeis Medal dinner.
Okay.
So if you
Great.
haven't met her, I'll be shepherding her around. She's a lovely person, and her work is super interesting. She guest lectured for Michelle Browning-Hoffman's class. The students loved it. She actually went and did some work at the clinic, worked with Shelley and the students there. She does work on femicide in Germany. That's her teaching dissertation. So she's had a really good visit, and I think that this is going to be a nice precedent to get more visitors from Turku.
Right, and the exchange, of course, works both ways. So just keep that in mind. John, I promised you a couple minutes on hiring.
Just all informational items. As you know, we started our interviews or callbacks for the lawyering skills position. Most of the remaining lawyering skills candidates are on your agenda. The final one will be here on October 31st. That's not on the agenda. That's Monica Todd. We scheduled a meeting. Colin sent out the notice for November 5th, which will be a hiring meeting, but limited to the lawyering skills positions. So we'll have that meeting. Then the very next day, on the 6th, we will start interview callbacks for the doctrinal position. And the dates for those, I won't give names yet, I'll send those out later. But the dates are November 6th, November 7th, November 11th, and the 21st. So there are 4 callbacks for doctrinal. Those are the 4 dates with the hope of getting at least this process wrapped up by Thanksgiving. We're proposing to have the hiring meeting for doctrinal on Monday the 25th, which is the Monday right before Thanksgiving. There are exams that day. There's, I think, torts in the morning. Pardon?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then, so we might think about having a meeting in the afternoon. There's exams in the afternoon, but they're up above that day. So unless there's a huge uproar, that's when we'll think the session in that meeting. And that's all.
Thank you. Questions for John Enid?
The comm was in the afternoon, I think, that day.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well,
Yeah, any exams in the afternoon is a problem, right? Because they could affect our ability.
I think a first-year exam would be more problematic than an upper level. You're just more likely to get students in your office in the first year. But I don't want to push it past Thanksgiving, but if we have to, if that's the will of the faculty, that's what happens. We just run the risk of losing people.
Okay, questions for John? Okay, thank you. One thing, and Lars may touch on this in different contexts as well, but with the loss of Jennifer, we've seen a lot now of faculty understandably going to staff to try and get things done, and there's been a lack of communication. If people could remember to approach the supervisor of that person and make sure that someone, especially for tasks that are unusual. So if you're going to use the LRC, for example, for something you're usually doing, I'm not talking about that, but we've had a lot of people going to staff for exceptional requests, things they're not usually doing. They think they have to do it because they're being asked by the faculty member, and it makes it difficult for them to prioritize their work. Do you want to address this? Joanne's saying, can you give us some examples? examples. So, for example, going to individuals to schedule, to help them with events, planning events, going to individuals to schedule exams at particular times. I'm not talking about any person in particular, there have been several, but not going to the supervisor. So it's only to just try and make sure that you've coordinated with the supervisor.
Would it be helpful to have an email to us to tell us who we should be going to?
In fact, Joanne, we have prepared a document which we're going to send out today, but we didn't.
You two planned that.
So it will go out and indicating who does what.
That'd be great.
Exactly. So, okay. Also, I just got this today. It's not on your notice of things, but if any of you have been involved in the CLEO with a K, not CLEO with a C program, the bar, which former leaders of the state bar are having a program to honor Alison Connolly from UK, who's been the real driving force of CLEO on November 6th. I'll send out the notice. If any of you can go, it'll be at the Bar Association downtown. And so Allison has really been incredible. So I would encourage you to go to that if you can, and I'll send that information. Because you should know what I'm up to and where I am, I've recently been elected to 2 local boards, the Community Foundation of Louisville and Actors Theater, and no, I cannot get you free tickets. Neely is really pushing deans to engage in these requirements. I'm not anticipating it will be a way during the workday, and in particular in the case of the Community Foundation, I'm hoping that that will really, give some beneficial knowledge on a very well-managed, robust foundation that will be useful. And so that's just to update you. I've also, Tom, you probably haven't seen it yet, but I've asked the Economic Welfare Committee to meet before the November meeting so that Lars can report on the budget model and we can have some faculty response on the new budget model, which he will describe. And so maybe I will do the bar results later and we can go to you now to talk about that.
I'll try to be very quick. I just had 3 points that I wanted to bring out, starting with exams. The administration, of course, is interested in helping everybody get their exams done the way they want to. It's just that I've noticed a couple of instances here in the fall where things have happened that we were not aware of. So it's hard for us to provide the accommodations for the students that they're entitled to and figure out a dean on duty for these things. So the people involved are me, Betty, and Emily. Emily and Betty work together on doing the accommodations, and Betty works on the scheduling the deans on duty. We want to be as supportive of you guys in the way you're giving your exams as possible. If you include us in the conversation, if you're giving an exam that is not already on the exam schedule and you're doing it a little bit differently, just alert us so that we can assist you as much as possible. On books ordering, I spoke to the person at Follett about this. She says she sent an email out to the university on September 23rd. I don't think many of us got it. A few people did, and that's how I know about it, because I think Grace got the email. But I certainly didn't, and so I'm sorry about the lateness of getting you the request for the book orders. If you could, as soon as you can, let Sunny know what your book orders are for next semester, and we'll get that ordered for you. I sent out an email earlier about that.
We got it from her, the woman you're talking about, yesterday and the day before.
You got another one from Follett?
Yes.
Well, that's good. You are entitled to order your own books.
It's definitely yours.
Yeah, well, that's probably why. Yeah, because I emailed her immediately and said, what's going on? So if we're happy, Sunny's happy to put this through for you. That's the system we've had in the past, and we're not changing that. You are entitled to order your own books through Follett if you wish to, but if you're going to use Sunny, have Sunny organize it for you, just send your email as soon as you can. That would be very helpful. And then the final thing is on the budget. I just want to let you know where we are. The budget committee meets every couple of weeks. We're at the point now where we've had discussions about both the 85% revenue share and what we're going to do, what we're going to recommend to the provost about the subsidy amount. We're finalizing that this week, I believe, but the process is we provide a proposal to the provost, and the provost then has to act on it. And we're not done with our work, and then she has to do her work. So we don't have a budget model yet, but we're very close to having it done. And when I have more information about what we finally decided, I think it would be useful for me to meet with the Economic Welfare Committee to clue everybody in on what's happening.
And to be clear, when Lars says a proposal, the way it will work is this. We get 85% of our budget, but there's still a gap between 85% and what we need to run our operations. So the proposal is that we go to the provost and say, we think the amount of the subsidy should be X, and she or he, whoever it is in the future, says yay or nay. It's likely that it's not going to be 100%. And what this really does is, as we indicated last time, it's really putting pressure on the units to think about how they do what we do. So in addition, I'd like you all to think about this. Lars will report and discuss with the Economic Welfare Committee between now and the next meeting, and then we'll put this on the agenda to discuss the new budget model because it will be voted on by the next meeting and our thoughts. And we're also going, curriculum has been asked to meet. Tony and Lars and I have been looking at ways that we can even think about structuring the teaching differently so that we're teaching more efficiently. This may mean, for example, that we decide not to do the doctrinal hire because we need to make that savings there. And or one of the hires, not necessarily doctrinal. I shouldn't direct it that way. Maybe two of them, I don't know. But these are alternatives that we're going to be forced to make if we're to continue. So, questions, thoughts? So we'll put it on Tony.
I just one thing about the hiring. So John, before Thanksgiving, the time period with the least exams is Tuesday afternoon. Tom Blackburn's income tax exam is then, but that's the only one.
26th? 26th, Tony?
The Tuesday, the 26th, yes.
That's certainly doable.
And then the first time that does not have any exams is the morning of Wednesday, December 4th.
I saw that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just, yeah.
But I might point out, the university's open Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Is it
We don't
really?
close on Tuesday, we close on Wednesday, but probably around noon.
Okay, so any questions on Lars' report? Tony told me he has no report today, so let me turn to where are we on time? Turn to the bar. So we originally reported that we had a 73% pass rate. In fact, the bar notified one of our candidates that they had misgraded her exam. She didn't actually request it, so we're now exactly at the state average for the last taking, which is 74%. Of course, that's nothing to celebrate, but the good news is that it doesn't mean that we have an accreditation problem, right? We still satisfy the ABA requirements 2 years out. Angela and Lars and I have looked pretty extensively at the results, and I'm happy to meet with any groups that the faculty thinks would be appropriate to think about how to address this. So we had 22 fails from the last one. 20 of them were spring 2019 grads. 2 of them had been people who had delayed taking the exam, but they get counted as first-time takers. So of those 22, it's almost equally male-female. There's no significant gender indication. The group was overwhelmingly white. Only 2 of them were diverse, so there was no correlation on race or ethnicity. But we do have some indicators that suggest areas of attention. So not preparing for the bar is pretty clearly a problem. So, that may sound obvious, but let me give you some statistics. Of the people who completed the entire program, whatever program they did, and we see no correlation between Barbary versus Kaplan or any other program. Of the people who completed 100%, 85% of those people passed. Of the people who completed 75% or less, 65% of them failed. So that's one thing that's clear. In addition, for most of the people who failed, supermajority of the people who failed. There are 3 or 4 predictors of failure during law school. We continue to know that the best predictor by far of successful bar passage is not undergraduate GPA, but law school GPA. So we can really identify starting early who those people are. And the LSAT score is a trailing second indicator after law school GPA. So some of the problems and the things we've seen is that people, and these may again seem very obvious, but it merits discussion then, people who have had mental or physical health problems, family or social issues, and I say there, for example, work obligations. We had a student who did summer school and then in July at the end started studying for the bar. We had people who didn't have a bar required job and decided really at the last minute and started to study late. So I think there are areas where you can intervene and counsel these students better. I don't know how we formalize that, but there are things we can do. So starting just to close this knot, Angela reports, and she's not here today because the bar examiners are here giving their mandatory 3L character and fitness meeting, and that's why she's downstairs right now. She reports that she's getting from both ends of the class. She gets the super overachievers who are worried about doing well who come to her, and she's getting people at the bottom, but she's not getting those people in the middle who may be struggling. Now, her course, of course, is changing. Starting next fall, all 1Ls who have a 2.5 or in the bottom quartile, must take her class, which will be graded. And evidence from other schools indicates that when you have a graded bar related course like that, or a performance improvement course, that makes a difference in performance. So that may be positive. She's also going to a couple of schools that are doing better than we are, but that are about where we are in ranking, specifically Kansas and SLU, to see what they're doing. And so we hope we'll get some information there. She and Lars and I have come up with a possible whole series of interventions, but maybe now I'll just open it up for any thoughts, questions, see what people think, or how we should even proceed as a group. So Tony, then Lars.
Okay, one of the things about people who, students or recent graduates, whoever, who have signed up for the bar exam, maybe they've started a bar prep course and something happens in their life. My observation over the years is oftentimes they feel like they're going to go ahead and just take the bar and see how they do because their money's already invested in it. And so I think one of the challenges here is just the financial issue that, if you're already signed up and you've already paid your bar prep course and so on and so forth, you while the law school may have an incentive for you not to take it, the student themselves does not.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the solution is to that, but that's, I think, part of the challenge there.
And if I could channel Angela a little bit, she and I have had some extensive conversations about this. So of the people who failed, whose GPA indicated that they were at risk, none of them were a surprise to her. And many of them also had these risk factors, and she points out to me just the number of risk factors just grows exponentially with the students who are failing, and it's usually low GPA, family crisis, don't study as much as they could, and they're working. And it's some combination of those. And it's hard to intervene in that. That's hard to avoid. The group that she's worried about is exactly the group that Colin mentioned, which is the students who fall a little bit above, but they're sort of amorphous. We're not quite sure what's going on that causes them to fail. They don't jump out. There's probably 8 or so of this last group that didn't jump out at her as having risk factors, but they also weren't in the group that were clearly going to pass. So the challenge is how do we identify them and help them in particular. She submitted a whole bunch of statistics to Bob Goldstein's department and asked him to calculate what he saw as the most useful indicators of failing the bar were. He took 25, 30 statistics, including a couple of classes that people had taken, and tried to see what was relevant. And GPA came back as clearly number one, the best indicator, LSAT number two. So we know what we're dealing with, right? We know what the challenges are. So I just wanted to add a little bit more to the concept.
Tim, others?
So to Tony's point, I mean, obviously the students, have no duty to us, right? As far as when they take the bar, it's entirely appropriate that they do the thing that's in their own best interest. But with the fairly new cap on the number of times students can take the bar, there might be an opportunity to say, look, you're at risk. Do you really want to burn one of your bar chances on this, where our numbers show that you can so much improve your chance of passing? I try not to use the F word when it comes to the bar. You can improve your chances of passing if you wait until February. Again, we cannot counsel students to do things that are not in their best interest just because they would help us. And of course, we're never satisfied until everyone passes the bar. But we've never been at accreditation risk from our bar results. This is a hard thing to talk about because you never want to seem glib. We absolutely want to have the student's best interest at heart. But we have never been at accreditation risk because of the bar exam. We are, if anything, at reputational risk. However, our sister school to the east, consistently admits students with a tick better credentials than we are able to. They have more resources. They just got $1 million gift from a law firm yesterday, for heaven's sake. And so if they're going to be able to attract students with that marginal better entry credentials, we're going to have more of an uphill battle to match or exceed their bar results.
Okay, the queue is less. Sam, others?
I don't know whether you should feel confident about the fact that what you said was different than we've tracked for the past 41 years. So to try as we might, and we keep trying. The one thing that the only thing I can really talk about is that the MPT was a new thing, and it replaced 3 of the essays. So it was worth 25% of the essays.
No,
Excuse
it
me.
was worth 15.
Well,
No.
You want me to talk about that?
No, we do know that.
I know, but do you want me to talk about it?
No, I'm just letting you know, they discounted it, it was 1/4 of the number of essays.
Right.
But they only evaluated it on 15%, so it was unfortunate.
Okay.
Because our students did okay.
Right. I'll go ahead and tell you. So when they were counting 25%, some of our students passed. And when they changed it to 15%, some of our students who had passed with 25% failed. Okay, so I don't know whether any of you have had anybody contact you, but I've had a couple people contact me about that, changing the rules at the very end. And I think it's a huge concern. But back to the MPT, apparently the results on the MPT were far worse. That's why they changed the percentage. That's why they changed the rules. Far worse. And it was the first time it had been used, and I don't know what, if anything, we can learn from that to change that issue. The other thing that I have never heard done before, and it relates to something that Colin was talking about before, this is the first time I've ever heard of them rounding up. So that somebody had a 74.8 or 74.97, and after at least a couple of these people complained, they rounded them up. So there were 4 people statewide who had been told they failed, but supposedly after consulting their calculators, they decided to pass them. They'd never done that before. So there are some odd things going on over there, and
Just by way of information on what the bar examiners are doing, the 3 deans have requested this week a meeting with the court again to address not primarily this in part, but also that the proposed higher MBE rule score that Kentucky announced will apply in July of 2020, which we're concerned about for a variety of reasons. But I'll report on that when and if that happens. So Sam is next. Others?
My take on this is always about being proactive and thinking about sort of picking up a little bit on what Tim said, not about preventing the F word, but increasing their chances of success. And it seems to me that we have in the past taken steps that maybe we aren't completely following through on now. The advising program for the students who are at risk has really fallen through the cracks in terms of, and part of that is because faculty, Angela has had trouble getting faculty to be willing to participate as academic advisors, and that has fallen almost entirely on her. So the advising program, I think, is useful if we can come up with some pretty clear parameters for what these students should be told. One of the things they can be told is when it comes time to study for the bar and take it, think about these things beforehand. So you're not trying to convince them during the summer to avoid a collision course with disaster. The other thing is, it seems to me, that we could think about what we are telling these students they need to be taking if we do have data on what courses they took and if there's any correlation between particular courses, not just between particular courses in Passage, but particularly those students at risk and the courses they took in Passage. So if you triangulate that, do we know that students need to have taken some things? So I think that's, if we can sort of drill a little deeper into the data, we might be able to come up with some useful tools to give anyone who participates in that advising and that Angela uses in the course to really communicate a more particularized message.
Angela and I, maybe Lars was there, we've talked about the issue of courses. We don't see, we have looked at this perhaps not in the depth you're suggesting. We don't see any correlation, and certainly the literature nationally says that there's no correlation between courses taught. It's really the skill. One thing, Angela, what you just said would be music to her ears, because one of her suggestions, she said it would really help if she had more communication with faculty who identified students at risk and they could figure out strategies to work together. And so I think on reviving in a more robust way the advising program would be great. The problem, as with most places, it tends to fall on the same people all the time. So this is really something I would hope is in everybody's interest to throw themselves into. Are there other? But I'll talk to Angela on both those points. Lars had his hand up. Are there others?
First, Les, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were going to make that point. It was I know for one student, this is exactly what happened. And they went from passing to failing because of going from 25 to 15 minutes.
When did they make that call?
Well, before they sent out the grades.
But after the students had taken the exam?
Yes. Because it was originally reported that what was the overall pass rate was 68% for everybody.
Yeah.
And they caught hell from the Supreme Court, but so they just made some changes. But it was because of the NPT results that they changed the relative proportionality.
Well, and from the schools, all of the schools' perspective, the whole way they handled the MPT, they were going to give it and they weren't going to give it, and students were getting different messages across the course of last year, and it was not, to say the least, it did not put students in a calm frame of mind.
And again, I'm sorry that Angela, just a couple of points to Sam. I'm sorry Angela's not here because she would speak more specifically to this, but she and I had conversations, and I think she would say that there's no evidence that the advising program that previously existed was of any statistical benefit to anybody. She didn't think that it was consistent or it didn't really make a difference. In fact, I think when Jennifer and I talked about it before she left, she was talking about how she was talking to students out of taking too many for example, core courses because they were killing themselves and not able to succeed at what they were trying to do. So I'm not sure that Angela would say that we need to revive the previous advising program. However, I completely agree that she thinks that a connection between her and the faculty members that are teaching the bar tested courses in particular to help students who are in the course and doing better with that she would really love to do that and coordinate with people on that. And then on the question of digging down into the data, she sent over a whole slew of information she had and asked Bob to run statistical analysis on it. I think she went back 3 or 4 years to see what was relevant. 5 years. 5 years. It came back once again, as we've known for a long time. I think it was a sense for a long time that GPA was the thing. That was the single thing that really mattered more than anything. And there wasn't a course, there wasn't any other thing that really jumped out at us that we didn't know.
Just point of clarification, I heard Sam though not saying let's revive the old advising program, but to come up with something different where there would be some expectations, correct?
Yes, and just sort of
I
taking,
think Angela would be.
and just taking off of what Lars was saying, I think it would be an interesting pilot to take a couple of classes where faculty would be willing to do this, and the students would have to be willing, I think, too, I guess. We'd have to think about that. But where we could be informed who in our class, let's say I'm teaching Crim Pro, and who in our class is in the at-risk group, and then we set up something for those students, maybe that's optional for them, but to say, you will have an extra, if you want, you can have an extra meeting where we will talk about the concepts, review the concepts, put you in a better position, and maybe that's a way to be proactive and positive with it. And you have some issues about stigmatizing students and all of that, which we want to think about. But maybe that's a way to do it and see if that produces better results for those students in that pilot program.
I mean, again, Sam, I think this would be music to Angela's ear. She mentioned exactly this kind of idea. She said have it called a lab. She could be the one to come in and give that extra session after coordinating with the faculty member to work on those things. And so, I think there's room to do that. The queue is Ariana, Joanne, Enid.
I thought that the advising program had been moved to reinstatement and probation with the very intent that Angela would have more control over the information disseminated. So we do have it, or we should have it, via the reinstatement and probation committee.
It does exist.
Yeah, I think from my understanding, is that Angela is revamping what the academic advising looks like, and because the way it was working before was completely ad hoc, and depending on who your faculty member was, you got different feedback, and so she's slowly changing it, and I am working with her. I'm the chair of that, so I am working with her on it. So there's movement. We are working on it, but I'm sure she would welcome any advice or feedback, and it's something we can work on. What I was going to suggest is, if it's my turn, one of the things that, when I still do some of the academic advising with students, and when they come to me and tell me I got a bad grade on this exam, is I have them go to the faculty member, and there's 1 of 2 things that could be happening. 1, they don't understand the material, and 2, they're not communicating it properly. And that's what I would want to know for these students that are having the low GPAs. Is it a problem of skill, or is it a problem of just not learning the material? Because I don't want to put someone in a lab where they're just being told the material again if that's not their problem. And so I think that's data we can get. We have the exams, and maybe we have to get the student's permission or something, but if the faculty members who gave those exams could, basically write a really short report like, oh, this looks like a communication issue, not a knowledge issue, then we would know what's going on with these exams and what's contributing to the poor GPA. Because the question on the bar is that are they not learning the material, and so they just don't know the answers to the questions, or is it they're not communicating it well? And that would mean completely different strategies of how to help these students.
Okay, the queue is Enid, Tony, Tim, Justin.
I'm fine.
Tony, Tim, Justin.
Just to add on, I think there's something a little more nuanced about a performance issue. So you might sort of think that as communication, but it's not so much that they can't communicate, but they're stressing out. They've got all these things.
Yeah, whatever the reasoning is, it's not what's in their head, it's that they're not putting it on the paper, that's all I mean.
Or what's happening in their head is getting confused under the stress. So
Okay.
I'm saying it's like a third thing. Yeah.
And that, yes, cool.
Tim, Justin, Russ.
It was my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, that most of the difficulties our graduates face, and which is historically true, a little bit of a blip, what was not so much the essays as it was the multi-stage. In which case, again, more help with essays is misdirected. I don't know.
I still think that's
Yeah.
the same question though, is it a technique issue?
Right,
Or is it they
yeah,
just don't
it
understand?
shifts a little bit, right. Fair enough. But we can't, we have to choose sort of what to focus on, what techniques to focus on, and knowing that,
I think we need the data.
Okay, Justin and Russ.
Question and then comment. Did you say that the bar examiners are in the building downstairs?
Well, no, from the office of the bar examiners, Grant Hellman and Beth Feemster, just not the bar examiners themselves.
And I don't know exactly understand the hierarchy. The Supreme Court appoints the bar examiners and the bar examiners hire staff, I guess, and these are.
Well, but these staff, I think Grant's worked there for 50 years. Grant, who certifies, who does the morals, the fitness certification, I think he's done this for 50 years. He's our graduate. And Beth has been there, Grace, you might know, she's been there a long time too.
Yeah, Grant's character and fitness, he's not a board of bar.
And he's not from them, is he? He just does
I
it.
think he's character and fitness,
Right.
that's his thing, but these other guys, the 80-year-olds are the ones who.
Yeah, but they're all appointed by the court, they're not.
Yes, they are. And don't they grade their own?
Yes.
You
Yes, they do.
you said something about a staff, I think they grade their own.
Yeah, Beth is
The
the.
board appoints the examiners, and the examiners grade.
Yeah.
And then the people who are in the
Who've
building.
never taught law school ever before in their life.
Yes.
Who are graded.
Yeah.
They're writing and grading.
Writing the questions.
Well, my comment is, and it helps know that I think sometimes Beth is maybe the person to get clarification from this on, but I was told that there was a power outage this year, that students had to sit for a long time, and then when they started again, no one was allowed to use the restroom. And someone asked, and it was an emergency, and they said no, and that person was not from our school, had an accident. And that is beyond uncompassionate.
Yeah, that's
It is corrupt and inhumane. And I would like to know from Beth, if she was there, if they did that to that student. I heard that they then started letting students use the restroom, but too late for that student. And I guess my comment is like, there's a lot we can do, there's a lot we should do, but, this is the organization we're dealing with. Good grief.
What do we do with
Aaron was there.
So I proctored both days of the exam this year, and yes, there was a power failure on the first day. They started, 2 hours late?
No, it was like 30 minutes.
No, it wasn't.
Well, they started late.
It was a 30 or 40
And I don't think
minutes
the
away.
time matters, it
But
started late.
It started late, and the decision was no one could leave the room until after the exam had started, right? That's the formal line. And I didn't witness anyone who had an accident, but there was someone who was pregnant, who they have finally made this exception for, because she went, guys, I'm pregnant, I can't wait. And then they started letting people go.
I hope that happened and not.
Yeah, I hope so too. Because that's traumatic. But yeah, I mean, it was obviously very stressful, and you can't control stuff.
Okay, just to alert people, if we have 15 minutes left, so if people have suggestions of things we should do, I'd welcome those too. Russ, you have the floor.
I don't know if this is isolated, but I had a student, third-year student, in my writing seminar this semester, can't write. I don't know if that's widespread. How does a student get to third year and not be able to write?
Why would they be able to? They don't have a a year later, if you haven't had to write in your undergrad, you come,
I don't give them all A's either.
yeah.
Like
So-
it's like someone can leave torts and not know torts, and someone can leave comma because they didn't do the work and they didn't do it well. Like, I can't make that.
Let me answer
So
two
let's
things
try
we're
and
doing.
keep just focused on
But I
the,
appreciate that, but we need to, the critique is valid that we need to, maybe, I think maybe we should be looking at how to improve, you know, maybe.
the writing requirements.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. Does the curriculum committee, okay, Kurt,
Yeah.
the curriculum committee is, currently looking at our writing requirement, and we're going to make some suggestions, some proposals to beef up what we are doing in terms of writing. And then the second part is the one I mentioned earlier, and the email went around, is we also have to assess, we're required to assess how we're actually implementing our writing requirements and what's actually happening with the students and the professors in the writing classes. That will be next year, because what we're doing is we're going to gather everything that happens this year and then look at it next year. But both of those should help, I think, considerably advance the quality of the writing of our students, or at least allow us to make changes that would do that.
Well, just, I mean, what I did was just make her do multiple drafts, one after another, after another, after another. And I told her, to incentivize her, I said, your grade will be based on the final one. So she's probably gonna get a decent grade, but only after tons of comments. I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours going through her papers. And I told her she should be taking writing courses next semester.
Okay, Jamie has the floor. Anyone else?
One concrete thing I think we could do is really try to strengthen the norm for exam feedback for all classes other than first semester, first year. I think our students are really great at coming around, especially for classes that are full year. But my spring tort students, it's a big year if 5 students reach out and want to go over their exam, and it's not the B- or below, it's the B+, A-, or the A students who want to go over it. For a class like family law, 50 to 70 students in 8 years teaching here, maybe 5 students ever have wanted to go over that exam. And so I think we could all try to think about how to incentivize students to come in and have a discussion, because that's where the other writing opportunity in the diagnostics, because substances at skill, that's where we could help with that.
Because you can require them. Right, Grace?
So, I certainly think we have a lot of work that we need to do to assist our students to do well. So I'm not just pointing at somebody else here on this, but Dee, you and I talked a little bit about who is the Board of Bar Examiners, and I think that a conversation with the Supreme Court about having people who are a bit more relevant to the practice of law. The doors are shut. Because, you know, as we talked, there are people on the Board of Bar Examiners who are in their 80s, and they've long since quit practicing law. So their ability to know what to test our students, I mean, we're trying to be relevant, we're trying to teach them what's coming out of the headlines today, right? And yet that's not what they're being tested on. And so there's this, I don't know, I fear a huge break there. And, you know, that's an issue.
Yeah.
An example of that is a recent torts question on negligence per se, 1 million practical ways you can test negligence per se, is a pilot who saw a sunbathing woman who scooped down below the air passage and crashed his plane. And it was a negligence per se analysis. I mean, it's an absurd question, it's dripping with sexism, and it's a distraction to answering. And there's any number of questions you could have asked. But, you know, so I don't even show torts specifically. I don't even show practice exams, and I do it all the time in family law because the torts questions are so whack. Like they don't.
Well, to these questions, as I said, the 3 deans have had requested a meeting with the Supreme Court, and I can move with my colleagues at UK and Chase and see if they would be willing to add this discussion to our menu of things with the court. I mean, I think the court, in my perception, starting with the chief on down, really sees the need for Kentucky to join other states, right? We're the only state, only Indiana. Indiana is the only state that touches us, I believe, I'm correct in saying, that now does not have the UBE. right? And I had dinner by chance, I didn't know I told you about this. It turned out I was sitting next to one of the bar examiners in his 80s, and I started, I don't know why, talking about the UBE, and he said, that's a terrible idea, they have to learn Kentucky law, and so, but I think the court feels differently. I've had several conversations with the chief in particular about this, so that might be part of it. So Jim, and just to advise you on time, we have 10 minutes, yeah.
I know we don't get these data, but it might be helpful if we did, to see if there's any significant difference in the failure or pass rate between the multi-state essay questions and the Kentucky essay questions, because the multi-state essay questions are the same across the country, obviously. So if there is a difference and our students are failing the Kentucky essay question specifically at a much higher rate than the multi-state, then that tells you something.
Except they don't release that.
Right, but if we can get those data, then that might be helpful to identify what the problem is.
Okay, anyone else on, thank you, on the bar results? Well, once again, we've had faculty who wanted to work on this, so please let me or Angela know. And she is examining, as Joanne said, with her committee, what the advising program should look like. Okay, Jim, you have one small item.
Yes,
even though we don't have a compliant technology.
Right, and although it's not necessary to show it. In the next few weeks, we're going to be implementing the university's trouble ticket system. University IT bought another new one and implemented it within the last 2 years, and after years of pleading from various units, IT people, for something that we could use as well, we finally have something. So we're going to start implementing that internally, and this is basically just an informational item. We will send out more when we're ready to do it. But it will be just a trouble ticket form where you can report issues, and if it's an issue we can't resolve, which many of them are, we can escalate it within the system to university IT. So within the system itself, we can hand something off to the help desk if necessary. This will be for students as well as faculty and staff. And this will be our priority point of contact for receiving issue reports. This will take priority over phone calls, emails, hallway conversations, parking lot conversations, and so on. Because,
so be advised.
Yes. Because this will give us a lot of efficiency. My department's a third smaller than it was a year ago, so efficiency is everything. It will also help us spot trends. So it will be very useful and helpful. So it will be coming. We'll also be moving our forms. We have a couple of request forms for AV gear and laptops. We can incorporate those into this as well. So we'll move those over there.
Questions for Jim? Okay, that ends our business. Do I have a motion to adjourn?